So you're wanting to know what a well-being check is. So typically well-being checks are either for the elderly or for children, although they can be for people of any age. I think that the terminology may differ slightly in different parts of the country. I'm in the American Midwest, but typically somebody will call in. They will say, I have this friend, I have this loved one that I have been unable to reach, and I am concerned that they may have passed away. They may have had a medical event and they may have collapsed onto the floor. They may be facing abuse, and especially with children, or they may be facing neglect, which could be either obviously for the elderly or someone with special needs or for a child. And I will tell you, many times when you, as an officer, go out, I have not been an officer for years and years, but I've been beside the badge for any number of years. And a lot of times you'll go out to a well-being check. And when you head out there, you really have no idea what you're dealing with. And it can run the gambit from extremely minor, like you get there and the person's like, nope, I'm good, all the way to the extreme where the person is in very bad physical health. The person has faced assault, all the way up to they're dead. And I can tell you there's few things worse for an officer than going up to the windows of a house and there's flies all over the inside of the windows. And if you're in law enforcement, you know what that means. And but going back a couple of steps. So when you're dealing with a well-being check, the officer or officers who go out, especially with children, when it comes to children, and there's an allegation of neglect, there's an allegation of abuse. What the officers are just there to do is to make sure the child is okay. And there are states that have specific laws. In many cases, in many states, if you as a private citizen refuse to allow the officer to speak with the child, you can be detained or even arrested. And so you need to be prepared for that if you're refusing. Typically when it comes to something like that, I know of a gentleman who dealt with that during his divorce. It's extremely common. And the officer comes out and he's getting out of his vehicle and has the child in his arms. And the officer's like, are you so-and-so? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, I'm looking for such and such. And the little child's like, gaga-goo-goo. And that's a very common thing. The officer's like, can you help me out here? I'm getting a report from his mom that da-da-da-da-da. And he's like, that the child had been like thrown out of a moving vehicle. And so the guy's like, obviously not. And says to the officer, I'm in the middle of a divorce. They talk for a minute. The officer's like, I got it. I'll document it. And we'll go from there. So you deal with extremes, and that is an all too common thing that happens, when it comes to well-being checkups. They're oftentimes abused. And then you've got situations where maybe there's a joint custody situation or whatever, and one parent who's not there with the child is unable to make contact with the child, and the other parent is refusing to let them talk to the child. Unfortunately, custody situations battles are terrible. They're just absolutely awful. And so the officer goes there, double checks, yep, kid's there, kid's fed and happy and fine, and they leave, or not. I mean, I know of an officer that dealt with a child that was under 3. I've talked about this before in my main podcast, but the child had a broken leg, and when they hit the house on a felony warrant, the child was facing terrible abuse. So checkups like this are incredibly important. A lot of times officers really dislike them because there is a lot of abuse of it. So let the officer make contact with the child, let him, have a little face-to-face moment with the child and go on from there, because 99 times out of 100, if there's nothing going on, that's the end of it. And then you've got a well-being check for someone who's elderly, and I can tell you a dozen stories about older folks that have fallen, they're not able to get to the phone, various things happen, they've had some kind of a medical event, and I know of people that have laid for hours or days, and they're not able to get up, they're pinned between things, they fell between a chair and a table, or their bed and the wall, and they just don't have the strength to get up. And unfortunately, you have to urinate and defecate, and now that's on you, and the risk of infection goes way up if it's not just a given. And the officers go out there and they're able to go in and help this person and save their life. And then you've got, I know of an officer recently that dealt with an overdose where some folks were like, hey, this guy is in a bad situation with his wife, and he may have tried to take his own life, and they get there and he had nearly overdosed, or people who have, slit their wrists or whatever. You got all kinds of different extremes. And I've even gone out on my own time when there was an older gentleman, he's passed on now just from old age, but he was always at the Liars Table at a local gas station. And I noticed for a couple mornings he wasn't there. I was like, I really was fond of the gentleman, and so I knew where he lived, and I drove out there, and as I was pulling up, he was leaving, and he's like, I thought somebody might check on me, but I didn't think it would be you, and I just try to be that guy. So that's another aspect of a well-being check. And then you've got situations with like domestic violence, and so somebody is communicating that they're in danger or whatever, and a friend or a loved one, a family member steps in, a neighbor, and those are awful when it comes to law enforcement. They're a necessity. I'm not knocking that. They're absolutely a necessity as law enforcement. We go out there and we investigate those situations. Sometimes people get overzealous and there's nothing honestly going on. Sometimes the person who's being abused and assaulted will downplay it or claim that they didn't call in, but they did. And then you've got the situations like I dealt with one, and I was still just a chaplain. I was along for the ride that night, but a woman had been held against her will and severely mistreated by the gentleman she was living with. And I won't repeat the details of it here. It's a closed case. It's a matter of public record now, but it was an awful situation, and the things that were done to her are unspeakable, and the man went to prison for it. And had it not been for a concerned neighbor, we wouldn't have known, and the man might have taken her life. He had hurt her very, very severely, and we caught him taking a break because he was tired of beating on her. And so that's one of the sad realities of a well-being check. So that's what a well-being check is you're going out to a location to find out if anything is amiss. A lot of times there's not anything going on that's wrong or bad. You make contact, you say hi, you say bye, and you go from there. So God bless. Have a great day.